Today's game features Spassky, Boris V playing as white against Fischer, Robert James as black. Move 1. White controls the center with d4. Contesting the center. Continuing, black maneuvers the knight to f6, activity on the kingside. Moving forward, white advances the pawn, preparing a pawn break. Black advances the pawn to g6. We're in the King's Indian, Samish, Pano main line. We're at move 5. White repositions the knight to c3. Next, black bishop moves to g7, developing with tempo. White advances the pawn to e4. Black pushes forward to d6. Continuing, white controls key squares with the pawn. Continuing, opts for kingside castling. White deploys the bishop to e3. Black responds with knight jumps to c6, building a strong pawn center. White places the knight on e2. Black pushes the pawn to a6. Move 15. White queen moves to d2. Black moves the rook to b8. And here, advances the pawn, creating long-term pressure. Black advances on the flank. It's white's turn. Fianchettos the bishop. And here, black advances the pawn. It's white's turn. Bishop takes bishop. Black king takes bishop, winning material. Meanwhile, advances the pawn to d5. Black maneuvers the knight to e7. On move 25, white finds a better square for the knight. Black pawn moves to c6. White takes the pawn with the pawn. Black knight snaps up the pawn, dominating the center. White castles queenside. Black places the bishop on e6. Interestingly, white king steps to b1. Black knight jumps to e8. White brings the knight to d5. Black pawn moves to b5, gaining a positional edge. We're at move 35. White repositions the knight to e3, maintaining the tension. Black doubles rooks on the file. White moves the rook to c1, improving the worst piece. Black queen joins the attack. White places the bishop on d3. Next, black finds a better square for the knight. Moving forward, repositions the knight to d5. Black activates the queen in the endgame, coordinating king and pawns. It's white's turn. Repositions the knight to f1. Not the best move. Black develops the knight to f6, the endgame unfolds. On move 45, white places the knight on e3. Black bishop snaps off the knight, the endgame idea is clear. White pawn captures the bishop on d5. Black responds with rook moves behind the passed pawn. White rook moves behind the passed pawn. Black queen to e7. White advances the pawn. Black brings the knight closer to the action. White advances the pawn. It's black's turn. King steps to f8. Not the best move. Move 55. White slides the rook to f2. At this point, black steps the king to e8. So, white deploys the bishop to f1. At this point, black knight jumps to c5. White now plays bishop slides to h3. Moving forward, black slides the rook to c7. White brings the rook to c1, that's a mistake. Next, black maneuvers the knight to b3, an inaccuracy. White pawn takes the knight. Interestingly, black takes the pawn with the knight. We're at move 65. White moves the rook to c6, that's a mistake. It's black's turn. Knight wins the queen, and that's check. White continues with rook takes knight. Black king marches up the board. Interestingly, rook snaps off the pawn. Black repositions the rook. White now plays activates the rook in the endgame. Continuing, king marches up the board. Meanwhile, develops the bishop to f1. Black plays repositions the rook. Check. The king must move. We're at move 75. White king captures rook. Black plays queen to a7. And check. A forcing move, improving the pawn structure. White activates the king. Black queen takes knight on e3. White king to c2. restricting the opponent's pieces. Next, pushes to b4. Spassky, Boris V resigns. Fischer, Robert James wins the game.